Welcome everybody to tacosandgeeks.com. Justin here, and we are going to do something in the spirit of Halloween and in the spirit of horror. Today, I wanted to talk about my favorite horror video game franchise, and that is Project Zero, aka Fatal Frame, here in the States. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is one, I feel that this, to this day, this particular franchise is still a hidden gem. It's still underrated. When I see people do their top 10 horror video games, it usually isn't in the top three for some reason. And I just want to talk about my love for the game, give you guys a quick overview of it, and why I feel like this is the definitive Japanese horror experience. And just a quick backstory on my story on how I was introduced to Fatal Frame. Just showing my age, I was in high school in the beginning of 2000, in the early 2000s, and I graduated in 2004, so you do the math. But I was introduced to Fatal Frame in my junior year. I think my first game I got from the Fatal Frames franchise was actually Fatal Frame 2. And I fell in love with it. I fell in love with it immediately. This was the first game ever where I dropped the controller and I literally turned off the PlayStation because I was just that terrified. We used to, and my friends who watch this video, they'll comment and they'll let you guys know this, but we used to have horror nights where my friends will come over or I will go over there. No one will play Fatal Frame but me. Everybody was just shook just watching it. So I was the one to play the game. But at the particular time, I was in such, and to this day, I still am. I love Asian horror. And I was watching Ringu, I was watching Ju-on, and I was just trying to consume enough horror as possible. And Fatal Frame just really, for me, really captured that. And today I'm going to explain why I feel that Fatal Frame is the definitive Japanese experience. So let's just give you a quick history and overview of Fatal Frame. So just a quick backstory on Fatal Frame, folks. It was created by producer Makoto Shibata and director Kikuchi. And they both had this idea or concept of a horror game where we do not rely on traditional horror means for combat, such as bullets, knives, or like kind of like melee attacks that we see in such games such as Silent Hill and Resident Evil, just to name those, because those are the, like, really definitive survival horror games that people always think of when we think of survival horror games in gaming. So Shibata and Keisuke envisioned a game where players will confront spirits and with only a camera as their weapon. And this is actually inspired by Japanese folklore belief that cameras can capture the essence of the dead. So during production, the team faced a lot of challenges on how were they going to be able to pull this off, but how they're able to make it scary, give us suspense with this sense of vulnerability, and really how are we going to create something minimalistic to heighten the fear and really give that player that immersion. So they're using skills such as lighting, sound design, ghost movements that were really there to just instill dread into the players. And as you're going to find out, there's a reason why I stopped playing Fatal Frame 2 when I was younger. It's just because that sense of dread, the way they were able to create this was just absolutely amazing. So without further ado, folks, from here on in, we are going to be talking about each of the Fatal Frame games. I'm not going to talk about the spin-offs, the book, or the movie. I did not see the movie. I think there was a movie. But anyway, I am not going to be talking about the DS spinoff or any other spinoffs. I'm just going to go through the first five games, the main storylines, and from here on in, there might be a little bit spoilers on plots and things like that. So you have been warned. But without further ado, let's talk Fatal Frame 1. So let's get into the talk about Fatal Frame. I'm not going to be going into full blown details of the story. I'm going to keep things very vague just in case you ever want to experience it for yourself, which you really should. But I will give you a quick overview of it, of each game, and then I'm going to go heavy into the gameplay because the gameplay all pretty much truthfully plays the same. So I'm not going to talk about the story for one game and then go gameplay. There's a whole gameplay section here. Anyway, so Let's talk about Fatal Frame 1, which was released in 2001, and it's set in 1986. Woohoo! Shout out to my 80s babies. Anyway, so Fatal Frame follows Miku as she searches for her missing brother, who disappeared while investigating the haunted Himuro mansion. The mansion was home to an ancient Shinota ritual intended to keep evil spirits at bay. However, the ritual failed when the chosen sacrifice, Kirei, was unwilling to be a sacrifice, and can you blame her? Nobody wants to die. This result, unfortunately, in a curse that traps her and the spirits in the mansion. And one thing I really liked about the story of Fatal Frame and just the overall arcing theme of Fatal Frame that you'll notice when you're playing it is that Fatal Frame has an overarching theme of rituals gone wrong, emotional scars, love, and the theme of loss and sacrifice. A lot of these games really go on to sacrifices and people being sacrifices and destiny and duty and love. So it gets really into the whole essence of some Japanese folklore. And one thing I did like about this particular entry is the strangling ritual. Here we have Kirei, who is being chosen to be that sacrifice. She's a maiden, and the sacrifice will help everyone seal the Hell Gate. But Kirei fell in love and fell in love for a man from the outside world, which causes her not to be willing to be a sacrifice. This creates an entire domino effect in the game where she, unfortunately, her spirit is forever trapped in that mansion. And this is where I said where we get that Japanese horror influences in there. Because if you play the first Fatal Frame now, you'll start to think, like, this reminds me of The Grudge. Like, if you go into the house of The Grudge, then, you're cursed. Same thing if you enter Himuro Mansion. You're kind of cursed and you're not getting out. So one thing I really did really enjoy about that was that our villain was the sympathetic one because she she's in love. She wants to live her life, but she's born into this particular situation where it's kind of like your free will or purpose, and your purpose is to be a sacrifice to seal these gates. But her free will is kind of like, no, I'm in love. I want to live. I want to have these experiences for myself. And somebody who played this game could see this as kind of being selfish, either from the people who are trying to sacrifice her or her being selfish because she's basically damning everybody to this curse by not willing to be the sacrifice. So leave in the comments below what your perspective is on that particular one. But let's talk about my favorite Fatal Frame game, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. Now, let's go to the GOAT. Now, one thing before I even talk about Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly, I just want to say this. For my survival horror fans, have you noticed that the best entry of most survival horror games, usually it's the second one? Let's look at it. Let me just talk about the big three, and I consider Fatal Frame part of that big three. Resident Evil, what's the best entry? Some might say four. A lot of us say it's two. Silent Hill, we all know the best entry is Silent Hill 2. Fatal Frame, hands down, the best entry is Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. And if you play all three games before, you know that the second one truly is the best in the series. What makes Fatal Frame 2 so amazing, what makes it so scary, and I'll get into the scare factors later, but once again, we're dealing with an eerie story. So, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly follows two twin sisters, Mio and Mayo, as they explore the eerie fog covered lost village, aka All Gods Village, and they're drawn there by Mayo's fascination with this crimson butterfly. So while exploring the forest, Mayo is lured into the abandoned village by a butterfly. Mio follows her, and then they encounter spirits of the villagers who participated in, guess what? Another failed ritual. But this particular ritual is called the Crimson Sacrifice Ritual. And in that ritual, they discovered that the twins originally in that village, not Mio or Mayo, but twins before, they were traditionally sacrificed in a ritual to appease the hellish abyss. The elder twin must strangle the younger one in the crimson sacrifice that will bind their souls as one. Now, have you noticed a pattern so far between Fatal Frame 1 and Fatal Frame 2? Both have rituals, and both rituals contain strangulation. And in this one, though, Mayu gets possessed by a spirit, which I won't go into because I don't want to spoil any more further. Just know that Fatal Frame 2 story is out of this world, and the experience alone, once I talk about the gameplay, because all Fatal Frame games really do play the same, you're going to see why I feel that this is the definitive Japanese horror experience. But we're not done yet. Let's give you an overview of the story for Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented. Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented was released in 2005. And truthfully, friends, this is actually my second favorite of the entries of Fatal Frame. What I really loved about Fatal Frame 3 is that not only did it try to do something different, I view Fatal Frame 3 more as a character study piece. And the reason why I say that is just because the way the story was presented to us, the way the themes are presented to us, and how the concept was approached. Fatal Frame 3, we follow Ray, a photographer who's haunted by the death of her fiance, Yu, who died in a car accident. Ray begins experiencing nightmares about a haunted manor known as the Manor of Sleep and learns of a curse that affects those who feel deep guilt and loss. And in this mansion, which is only visited in her sleep, where spirits are tormented by unfulfilled desires, she learns about a tattoo priestess ritual which is meant to absorb people's pain. The ritual involves a priestess who is tattooed with ink, and this ink is mixed with pain and suffering of others. Can you imagine that? When a ritual fails, the priestess becomes the entity known as the engraver, spreading a deadly tattoo curse. As Ray explores, she notices and realizes that the spread of the tattoo curse. The curse manifests itself as it creeps into the person, creeping tattoo, by the way, which ultimately kills the affected person by stopping their heart. And if they cannot resolve their inner turmoil, they are dead. And this is what I said why I call this more of a character piece. It's not mainly focusing on the actual curse per se. Don't get me wrong, the tattoo priestess, the curse, all that is heavenly present. But what Fatal Frame 3 does is that it really focuses on that feeling of guilt, survivor's guilt for Ray. But there are other characters that were introduced that are also dealing with some type of turmoil that they have to overcome. Otherwise, they will be succumb to the effects of the tattoo curse. And that's something I really did like. It's more of, yes, it's horror. Yes, the scares are still there. You're still using the camera and everything else. But it's more of an examination on how one is dealing with such loss. And I thought they did a really good job of really presenting that. I honestly think if it wasn't for how great part two was when it just comes to the story, the execution, the scares, Fatal Frame 3 would have probably been my favorite because I'm someone who really loves those narrative, character driven study type of pieces. And I think that Fatal Frame 3 really nailed that. So let us talk about Fatal Frame 4 Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. Fatal Frame 4 Mask of the Lunar Eclipse was released in 2008. And honestly, for me personally, this is my least favorite of the bunch. I actually played this when this originally, folks, did not come to the States. This was a Japan exclusive for the Wii. And if you know me, you know I at the time, this is pre ONG, but I was so heavy on import games that if you know me, then you know I went to Chinatown in New York City and I went to J&M's back when they were in Chinatown, now they're in Manhattan, but I went to J&M's. I got Fatal Frame 4 and I did what I had to do and we played it, and I honestly was not really impressed with this one. But Here's an overview of the story. It's set in Rogetsu Island. Mask of the Lunar Eclipse follows Ruka and her friends who return to the island where they were kidnapped as children to uncover the mysteries of the Moonlight Syndrome. So Ruka and her friends aim to recall their lost memories and understand the events that took place during their captivity, linked to the island's ancient rituals. So this one is the lunar ritual, and the ritual involves the rite of the lunar eclipse, in which a maiden wears a mask to appease the moon spirit. However, the ritual failed. Of course it did. It's fatal frame, causing victims to suffer moonlight syndrome, which is driving them insane. Ruka's friends are killed by spirits as they attempt to remember their past. Ruka learns of her own role in the ritual and the consequences of the failed ceremony. And I won't dive into that anymore because it'll be more on a complete spoilers. So Fatal Frame 4, honestly, story wise, I feel like it was the weakest one. I did like a little bit of what Ruka discovers and what she was meant when it came to this particular Master of the Lunar Eclipse. But yeah, Fatal Frame 4 was kind of the weakest one of it, even in execution and gameplay, especially when it came to the Wii. Of course, motion controls was really big at the time, and Nintendo's pushing that overdrive. So, of course, Fatal Frame, you would think with the motion controls of you using that on the camera obscura, that it'll feel a little bit more just right with it. It felt a little bit clunky, and thankfully the Switch version is a little bit more better for that. And less I say about 4, the better. So let's go into the last entry, which was released years later in 2014 with Fatal Frame 5, Maiden of the Black Water. Fatal Frame 5, Made in the Black Water, was released in 2014, and it's set on Mount Hakami, a place notorious known for, I can't say that word to YouTube censors, let's just say self deletion. Made in the Black Water follows Yuri, Ren, and Mino, who is somebody's daughter, which I won't get into because spoilers. Let's just say, folks, I forgot to mention this, all the Fatal Frame games are interconnected. And if you play them, you'll see how certain characters pop up over again. I will say certain survivors will pop up. So this game follows these group of people as they uncover the mysteries of the mountain and the corrupted ritual of the Black Water. Once again, the Black Water. So Ray is a writer who is researching the mountain, discovers the history of the failed maiden of the Black Water ritual. The shrine maidens were drowned to keep a malevolent force, the Black Water, from consuming the world. Miu is in search of her particular mother, who will not be named. The corrupted ritual, the Black Water ritual, involves maidens being drowned, as I just said, to appease the mountain. But the ritual became corrupted, leading to the spread of a Black Water curse that drives people to self terminate. And there are some aftermaths and resolutions in here, which I'm not going to go into due to spoilers. However, I will have to say, in terms of story, this one's the darkest one. Like, because it's dealing with a serious subject matter, and the way it's handled here, I was just like, well, damn. It's a dark one. This is probably the darkest entry in this particular franchise in terms of story. In terms of character development, the characters I would say are way better than Fatal Frame 4, but not as good as 3, 2, and 1. But it's good just enough to bring the series back and end it, at least for the time being, end it on a decent note. So overall, when it comes to this Fatal Frame franchise in terms of story, what I really love is the fact that they do touch on those themes such as emotional scars, grief, loss, and just it's all really symbolic due to the power of the camera obscura and the eerie spirits that are bound by these tragic fates. The stories alone are good, but you know what really creeps you out, what really adds to it, and just like any other horror game, is hearing the stories of NPCs. Throughout all the games, you'll get recordings, you pick up readings, news clippings, and just reading these stories, you realize how horrific, how tragic a lot of these NPCs' lives were, or a lot of tales that just goes wow, I would not survive that if this actually happened in the real world. And the whole story of Fatal Frame and what they really try to do with it when it comes to the themes of the game, I think they really hit home with that. And I think they really captured that essence of Japanese horror and what it means to really do that in terms of sound design, pacing, storytelling. And we're going to get into the gameplay in a momentarily. But as far as story goes, this truly for me is the definitive Japanese experience, Japanese horror experience, because of the way it was presented, the folklore and elements of Japanese horror movies that were taken from it. And I thought they nailed it. And to this day, I still have not seen a Japanese horror franchise like this one that really kind of has that particular influence. I mean, we've seen other games that have Japanese horror influence and aesthetic and stuff, but I feel like Fatal Frame is that gold standard. So let's talk about how Fatal Frame plays with gameplay. Now that I've given you a very vague look at the Fatal Frame series story, let's talk about the gameplay. How does the Fatal Frame series play? Well, the series centers around the camera obscura, which is going to be our main tool. And for those who are not familiar with it, it's a supernatural camera capable of capturing and exorcising spirits. Unlike most survival horror games where players are using conventional weapons such as guns and knives and bats and whatever, Fatal Frame turns the camera into a weapon that can ward off and defeat these spirits. This mechanic alone transforms the player's vulnerability into an offensive strategy. It demands you to get up close to get the best shot, and the gameplay encourages that by balancing their fear of the supernatural, which you need to get close to the spirits to deal the most damage. And it really does amplify the tension and horror in the game, especially since when you're using the camera obscura, you're in first person. So there's moments in this time when you're playing the game where the ghost might teleport behind you. You have to turn around quickly and there's the ghost. So you really have to get up close and personal. However, it's not just used to be fighting off the ghost. The camera obscura also serves as a tool to reveal hidden objects, clues, and other spirits that are blending into the environment. It's also used to help with the mechanics of puzzle solving when you're exploring. Players must constantly assess their surroundings through the camera lens, and it really does a great job of building that sense of dread. Throughout the games, you also get to upgrade your lens, such as range, sensitivity, and power, and sometimes also, depending on what game you are playing, you can actually slow down the ghost, and it really does allow a lot of that customization, so you really get to experience a little bit more when it comes to the upgrades. So it's not just constantly point and shoot. There are some strategic elements to it. In Fatal Frame, combat is slow paced and relies on timing and precision. So when a spirit is approaching you, you must wait for the ghost to get close to you, or if you're brave enough, like I am, I like to go and move closer to them because I don't got time for that. I want the spirit particularly gone. And at the right moment, when it's highlighting red, you'll see this circular reticle that turns red and it's known as the shutter chance. This mechanic encourages you to confront the fear rather than evade it. So basically, when it's shuttered red, you press it, and then you'll get another chance to hit a critical hit opportunity, which is called Fatal Frame. And it rewards the players for taking a photo at that last possible moment before the ghost attack, dealing maximum damage and offering additional points, which you can use to upgrade your camera. See, it pays to be brave. And this mechanic was refined as the series progressed with later installments, adding like things such as the double shutter and chain combos that allowed you to go back to back with your critical hits. In addition to that, it had more combat increased base skills and it rewarded you for your timing. Now, in terms of that scare factor and that exploration, it's the haunting atmosphere that really does create that sense of dread, which is often based on that Japanese folklore that I was talking about in real world locations and dark history. The first three games primarily take place in the mansions, villages, shrines, with later entries expanding to locations such as hospitals, forests, and urban settings. Unlike other survival horror games, Fatal Frame uses its environment as this basically as a plot device. So you're often finding handwritten notes, diary, film reels, audio, especially in Fatal Frame 2. The audio is haunting, really is. That reveals the tragic backstories of our NPCs and the spirits that are haunting the area. These elements are usually optional, but trust me, you want to dive deep as much as possible for the lore because, like I said, it gets dark, it gets really sad, and it's just some really tragic stuff that's happened to these people. Also, it wouldn't be a survival horror game without resource management. And in Fatal Frame, it is critical as you must conserve limited film types and items and healing items and camera upgrades. Your highest films, you want to conserve those for the boss battles, while your standard 14 film is what I use personally for the enemies because I want to save mines for the big battles. Your herbal machines and sacred waters, excuse me, herbal machines, herbal medicines and sacred waters are kind of scarce far in between depending on what level you're playing. So once you see those health items, once again, conserving is the key. The game does incorporate puzzle solving that's often related to Japanese culture, folklore, and spiritual themes. Many puzzles require the camera obscura to reveal hidden symbols, or a new path will open for it, adding more mystery to what's going on. The mechanic really does a good job of building that tension, and solving puzzles frequently triggers a ghost encounter, a jump scare, and really does make sure that, okay, you're never really truly safe playing this particular game. And as far as the gameplay goes, when it comes to that, folks, when it comes to the scares, just a warning, yes, there's a lot of jump scares in here. A lot of jump scares. I mean, if you're playing 1 through 5 and you're just playing them like how I did Resident Evil, I did Resident Evil before. I played Resident Evil 1, 2, I did 0, 1, 2, 3. I did 0 through 8. Like, I did a Resident Evil game a month. So it took me 8 months to beat all the Resident Evils, right? And by the time you get to the eighth one, when it comes to the gameplay, like, I'm so worn out. But when it comes to Fatal Frame, it's kind of hard to play them back to back to back to back to back because of the jump scares. The jump scares are relentless, especially in Fatal Frame 2. And it happens out of nowhere because these spirits just appear. They're ghosts. They're going to just show up. It could be like in a safe room, you exit the door, boom, it's right there. And you're like, what the heck? I'm in a safe room. And don't get me wrong, they come to the safe rooms too. So you're not really technically safe in the safe room either. And that's the thing that I really like about it. And what makes this scary is just the fact that they pop up out of nowhere, but it's just also the story. It's also the sound design. The sound design is what really sells it. If you're able to play this with headphones, or if you have a really good surround sound system, you are going to feel every bit of the atmosphere, from the surrounding sound to the little whispers, the little cries, the little screams that you hear in the background. If you're really turning it up, you're like, what is that? What is near me? It does a wonderful job of really creating that sense of dread. I want to end this video with just talking about the impact and the influence of Fatal Frame. So, as we discussed, and I've been saying it throughout the entire video, but as we know, Fatal Frame is deeply rooted in Japanese folklore, borrowing from real myths, ghost stories, and cultural superstitions. The spirits that we encounter in the game are often victims of tragic or violent ends, and these spirits are bound to the locations due to unfulfilled emotions or grudges. These are some real tragic characters, and that adds a tragic dimension to it because the enemies or antagonists that we're facing are not necessarily pure evil antagonists. These are actual victims of circumstances and things that has happened to them. And unfortunately, this is the only way that's been manifested. The themes of death, loss, and the supernatural are intertwined throughout the narratives of these games, with characters often facing personal traumas that manifest into ghostly encounters. The approach to horror is unique, and it does not solely rely on jump scares, even though it's a whole bunch of them, but it does a great job of creating atmosphere. And once again, that sense of dread that really makes you feel connected to these tragic stories in the game. Fatal Frame has a lot of influence in both video games and I will say a little bit in the pop culture realm. Its distinct use of the camera as combat and storytelling device set it apart from other franchises and demonstrate how non-traditional weapons can create unique horror experiences. It also focuses on atmosphere, psychological horror, Japanese folklore, and it really, for me, is the definitive Japanese survival horror experience. No one has done what Fatal Frame has done. Playing Fatal Frame, I feel like I am actually in a Japanese horror movie. Just the way it's presented, just the way from the sound design, the acting, the scares, the emotion involved, the character study, it all turns into that Japanese horror movie experience. While not as mainstream as other horror franchises, Fatal Frame for me remains one of my favorite, if not my favorite, survival horror series next to Resident Evil. And it's awfully overlooked. And I feel that if we are able one day, hopefully, to get a remaster of 1, 2, and 3, people will see what so much of us who love this particular franchise see an amazing Japanese horror experience. This is Justin from tacosandgeeks.com. What did you think of the Fatal Frame series? Have you ever played any of the games? Comment below, let me know. And also let me know which one of the games are which one of the favorite games is your favorite. And I forgot to give you my rankings. So here, before I sign off, I gotta give you my rankings. So I'm gonna start from least to favorite. So we already know Fatal Frame 4 is my least. Fatal Frame 4 Master of the Lunar Eclipse is my least favorite. Wasn't a real fan of the story. And at this point, the gameplay did feel a little bit stale. The Wii's clunky controls just it really wasn't really responsive for me. I was not a fan of it. The next one I would definitely have to go with Fatal Frame 4 Maiden I mean Fatal Frame 5 Maiden of the Black Water. And in this game it used the Wii used gamepad as the camera obscura, and you had to really physically lift and aim the controller to take the photos, which was giving you more of that sense of immersion. But as far as the story goes, I would have to say story wise, I felt like just because of the nature of theme that it was dealing with, this was the darkest entry in terms of story. But I would have to say it definitely is still probably on my least favorite on the category. Now we're going to obviously my rankings. You already know what my number one is. You know what my number two is. So Fatal Frame will come right after that. It is the one that started it all, but I just feel like the other two entries did take the ball and really ran with it. And then we have, of course, Fatal Frame 3, The Tormented, which I feel is the best of terms of character development, character story. Ray is such a great character. And then, of course, my favorite game, my favorite survival horror game of all time, folks. Yes, it is. Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly, hands down the definitive Japanese horror experience. If you like what we do here, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. Hopefully, I earned your subscription. And peace, love, and happiness to you all. Thank you for visiting tacosandgeeks.com. This is Justin saying, later days. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace, love, and happiness. I'm out.